Përshëndetje, unë vi nga qyteti I vogël Pogradec në Republikën e Shqipërisë.
I'm Stephany. It's a little hard to say where I'm from. I grew up in Hong Kong from age 3 to 10, so my memory of it is kind of blurred, but I always thought of it as my home, even though I probably won't be considered a local there. But my family, we speak the language, and we try to go back once in a while. Where we live was like the south of Hong Kong Island, and my memory of Hong Kong Island was just like us going to Causeway Bay to shop, and then having this kind of image of the Victoria Harbour where people would go to celebrate holidays. But other than that, I never really looked beyond the harbour to see what's on the other side. So for my thesis, I was pretty interested in investigating the kind of possibilities that can bridge the two land masses and the minor differences in the culture. And also to address the land shortage issue, because Hong Kong being so small and most of its land is mountainous, it's not very developable. So what the government decides to do is to keep reclaiming land from the harbor or building fake islands like where the current international airport is at. So that results in like a major narrowing of the harbor, which kind of halved its original width. And people there just mock that it's becoming a river rather than a harbor.
This past year, I focused my research and thesis in the country of Albania. Albania is a small country in southeastern Europe, and it has the coastline of the Adriatic Sea. My family and I moved from Albania when I was about 11 years old, and so having spent part of my childhood there, I wanted to be able to bridge the gap between the two cultures and maybe give back my understanding of what's going on there and try to help through architecture and design.
I think for my thesis, I was really interested in the urban culture. Growing up in a small mountain town, I engaged more with the nature around me and my immediate neighbors. Whereas living in the city last year, I was really intrigued by the density and pace and structure of a city. So how you can tackle such a intense culture in a really rigid built environment. So how architecture can begin to engage such a diverse range of culture.
Where I was more interested in focusing on religious culture versus ethnic culture. I was particularly interested in how both religions, like Christianity and Islam, they promoted spreading their own religion, but the architecture was always a vast majority of the architecture was always very catered towards the believers and not very open, or didn't really address those who didn't believe or weren't of the same belief.
What the city of Hong Kong lacks is really appreciation for art and architecture. Recently, there's been a French graffiti artist who's been tagging all over Hong Kong, but it was deemed just as regular or like obscene graffiti that the government decided to cover up. So there was like a small uprising from the local art community to try to protect these and preserve these by taking pictures and sharing them on Instagram or like uploading on the web. Because what the government really wants is like a clean, presentable image as like a world-class city. So like they want to focus on the art that is typically in the museums and not on the streets. And it's the same for architecture too. They always want like the beautiful rendered image of Hong Kong buildings instead of like the alleyways and the small streets that had a lot of the virtues of urban city life, and they like just take it all over, bulldoze it, and build something new. And so I think by educating the public to appreciate art, all kinds of art and architecture, it would really benefit the culture as a whole.
Albania was communist up until 1990, and so they have faced a lot of oppression. And through the transition into democracy, there's been a struggle to maintain legitimacy and be able to have a successful democracy. This is due to bad politics, schemes, or corruption. And so in regards to the people, there's this overall sense of not being able to do anything about what's going on as far as the issues there. There's this general feeling of the loss of hope that people just have sort of chosen to accept the reality that's presented to them without having any sparks of interest into questioning it or doing something about it. So there's a lack of motivation, there's a lack of sort of cultural habits of modifying and changing things.
I think what I really picked up on was this disengagement that people had with their built environments around them, that we get stuck in this continuous pace, and we're so intrigued with our immediate phones and iPods. Everyone's so plugged in, and we're in this constant, like this routine nature that I feel like some of this architecture doesn't. It takes a really passive stance, and that there can be design that can actively engage people and pull them out of this just continuous speed.
In a lot of religious architecture, the elements are very only catered to believers versus unbelievers, which makes sense. But if you're trying to promote, like, to be inclusive, to share like your religion with other people, then your architecture or the spaces that you create should be more open, or more open to people of different beliefs or who are more new to that belief. So in general, like, if the design or the spaces are more versatile, then it would be less exclusive to those who don't believe the same idea.
I think what's so critical about the harbor is that it's a really underutilized agency for architecture, in that most of the harbor front is dedicated toward tourism and not for the local people. But by introducing new programs to that area, it can really diversify all the areas around it, including the areas specified and zoned for high-end residential or like specifically just for industry. And having an intermix of programs would definitely create new experiences for both locals and the tourists coming to Hong Kong. I think the number one job of the architect is to try to immerse himself in the local culture and to realize its context in more of a human scale and people scale, rather than the big world-class image.
Architecturally, these problems translate into an architecture that has been deployed to control and to be designed strictly for functional services, and not really allowing people to interact and be in charge of the environment that they're in. And so in this case, I think that architecture can act as a tool in which it can help revitalize a culture by providing different spatial situations in which the people are placed in charge of their built environment, and they're provided with these opportunities where they can modify what's in front of them. They can interact and change the way that their built environment is presented to them in a way which it needs to be spontaneous and fun and in a playful way.
Design right now has a tendency to over-segregate and over-prescribe spaces, usually giving a specific space an inherent use. So I think architecture can start taking on a more ambiguous role, or start to overlap or overlay programs as to where they aren't so specifically defined, leaving it open for multiple uses, multiple understandings, and potentially allow for like a reappropriation of the space, which would actively engage users and make a space more than just a understood or predictable space.
Architecture can address this in various ways and really promote social interaction. And one way would be to create spaces that are kind of ambiguous. So by creating a situation of uncertainty, architecture can encourage this social interaction. But the idea is to create this interaction in order for people to have a better understanding of each other when they talk to each other, and to not let these ideological barriers that are bolstered by symbolism to create borders or barriers between them.
I think being an outsider has really helped me to kind of think outside of the box, in that you don't necessarily have to build on land, or you can use different elements of the geography as an agency for architecture.
And even though I have assimilated into the everyday life in the United States and have been accustomed to things here, I think I'm able to sort of compare and contrast the two cultures and be able to put myself back into the Albanian culture, and then provide this feedback from living in the US, and also the background of traveling and studying abroad in other places. So being able to have these different perspectives, and what I see is right in these cultures that I have lived in or traveled to, and being able to pinpoint the things that are working there and try to translate that and infuse it somehow into the culture in Albania.